Thank you so much. Let's see if oh, perfect. Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We're excited to answer some questions and really get into the weeds of the gut microbiome and IBS, SIBO, and beyond.
All right. Well, we're excited to hear what you guys have to say. So before we go ahead and get started, why don't you fill in the audience on a little bit about you, I guess how you came to this and what you've been doing the last 5, 10 years on this journey that you're on.
Yeah, oh my gosh, where to begin? I mean, overall, I'll say, and I'll let Dahlia speak for herself a little bit, but really for me and even Dahlia, we were our own patients first and foremost. Like we were sick standard American children moving into sick standard American adults. Just I was riddled with disease and Dahlia even more so than me. We just found ourselves searching. And in that search, we were like, oh, registered dietitian's kind of like a food doctor. And so we became registered dietitians. And then even with that, where we were working, I started out in public health and I was realizing, my gosh, there's so much red tape. My thought was like, if we get the right policies, people will just follow those policies and it'll be great. It'll be sunshine and rainbows. But you come to find out all the politics and the money and the red tape, and you're like, oh my gosh. So we were constantly searching and really it was like we need to open up our own practice. And that's where Mary's Health came from. It's integrative practice. We get to spend time with our patients. We get to dive deep. And really on that journey, we dove into the gut microbiome because we're constantly looking for, okay, well, why? So if you're bloated or if you have high blood sugar or if you have cancer or autoimmune disease, why? Why? So in asking why to each of those diseases or each thing we came across, we ultimately, what we feel is the nexus, which is the root for pretty much everything in this world, is the microbiome, right? So that's why we're so passionate. We really love it. And you can
And
add to that.
yeah, we've been on this journey professionally for over a decade and just
Yeah.
personally now for, a few decades. And we've just seen incredible transformative healing within ourselves, within thousands, literally thousands and thousands of
Our
people
patients.
who we've served both one-on-one in our programs. So we are just grateful to be here with this opportunity, doing this work and just helping people heal with each meal. That really is just our mission at the end of the day.
All right, great. So let's get started. So first, how has this what seems to be relatively new understanding of the microbiome and kind of came out of nowhere where all of a sudden it just became the hottest topic in health. How is that understanding of the microbiome changed our understanding of health?
We've really, since it's been about the mid 90s that we really started understanding, okay, we're cutting out fat, we're cutting out sugar. It's not necessarily making the hugest impact on heart disease, obesity rates, metabolic conditions. We were trying to manipulate just what we could control, saturated fat intake, refined carbohydrate intake. And we were starting to see there were other factors that were contributing to it. So since the mid 90s, we've really understood, we have all these microbes. We are more microbial DNA than human DNA. These probably are influencing our health in some way, shape, or form. And that's when they started the Human Microbiome Project, where they started mapping the microbiome to really understand, okay, who's living in the gut and what are their roles and what are their functions. And here we are, almost 30 years later, and we're still not sure. We've mapped the colon. We've really understood a lot more about the colon microbiome, but the small intestine has its own microbiome that they're actually still investing in understanding a little bit further the functionality. We're such complex beings as humans as is. So then to understand that whole nother layer of how the microbes and how complex they are and how they intertwine with our own DNA and bodily functions is just so, so, so important. So it's exciting. We've been in this gut space, gut sphere for, the better part of the last decade. And so it's been exciting to see, oh, wow, other people care about it. And they're really starting to understand it does really matter.
And I'll just add to that, like the everyday person has to understand the delay, but luckily with technology, there's
Mhm.
less of a delay, I think. But typically research, or I would say the guidelines that come out, or especially like food companies and whether it's government bodies or other organizations giving recommendations, that's delayed by about 10 to 15 years. It's a behind, you know what I mean? So there's 10 to 15 years of research going on that maybe is different, but by the time those guidelines come out, we're about 10, 15 years delayed on that. So it feels like the microbiome came out of nowhere, but that's just that delay. And luckily, I think, the good and bad of social media and technology, the good is that now you have you're able to have a direct connection. We're able to have the real truth about health. We're able to do these conferences online. We're able to speak directly to communities. So you're hearing maybe research that won't actually come out in guidelines for another 5 to 10 years, but you're hearing it from practitioners who are implementing it in their practice today, right? And that's really speaks to the innovation of our technology and the research. We hopefully are going to just kind of shorten that delay over time, and that's the key.
And one thing I like to always say is, we should use research to expand and not contract, right? Because today's pseudoscience is the next decade's guidelines. So I think with the microbiome, we're really learning that where, in less than 5 years ago, we were hearing practitioners say leaky gut is just what functional medicine people say. And, those crazy naturopaths are talking about it and it's not real. And now we're saying, oh, actually it is. We've coined it intestinal hyperpermeability, but it is in fact a real thing. So, in the gut microbiome, I think it's so important to continue to keep an open mind because you don't know what you don't know. So to kind of have practitioners who are very quick to say, no, pseudoscience, not proven, not evidence-based, not in the guidelines, it's always saying, yes, not yet. However, there is emerging research and we need to consider it and be open to it.
Right. That sounds very familiar with the idea of like Ayurvedic for, I don't know, thousands of years. It's been talking about inflammation as the root of disease. And it was very much poo-pooed and looked at just, magic and voodoo basically. And now Western medicine is like, oh, look what we've discovered. It's the root of disease. So
Right.
is the microbiome, I hear, and I might be blind because of the circles that I run in, but has it become widely accepted that the microbiome is really at the heart or close to it of the way that our body works in general?
I don't know if I would say it's been fully accepted, but you do have like the American call
College of
yeah,
Gastroenterology.
College of Gastroenterology really coming out with now guidelines for the microbiome and speaking to the microbiome and probiotics. So I feel like practitioners, as long as they're staying up to date, are going, oh wow, like this is here. This is a thing. I don't know if as strongly as we come out and going like the gut microbiome is the nexus of all health on the planet, like we truly believe that. And we are spreading the message of like, if you care for any ecosystem, first and foremost, it should be your inner ecosystem, which
Mm.
is your gut microbiome. Think of it like you're carrying this terrarium, and it is the most important ecosystem because your dietary habits, your choices, your tastes, your likes shape and diffuse out into larger ecosystems, right? And that's many spheres and many influences. So I don't know. I wouldn't say the mainstream is quite there yet, but I think they will be. They'll finally get it. Because really, I mean, logically it makes sense, right? When you're caring for the smallest creature, you're caring for all creatures by default. So if you think of the bacteria, archaea, fungi, all these beautiful, really microorganisms that are live and living in us, wow, it's pretty amazing. If you care for them, they care for you, and it just ripples outward.
So you during one of your comments, you had mentioned that about the small intestine, they're kind of figuring out the microbiome and in the small intestine. Should we be looking at these different areas of bacteria? Like there's the oral microbiome, there's the gut microbiome, and then I guess there's the small intestine microbiome, and then there's the microbiome on our skin. Should we be looking at it as individual things, kind of like we have historically looked at organs, or should we be looking at it more holistically, that this is really just one microbiome and may even transcend our body because we know that even the people around us affect our microbiome? Or should we be looking at it as that you have this distinct microbiome that's completely just that's completely different than the next one over?
I think a great analogy for that is like the Colorado River or the Amazon River, right? I think when you look at these huge rivers and you can almost think of our GI tract as a massive river that runs through our entire body, and you have these rivers that run through multiple or even single huge continents. Along that river, you will have different ecosystems. So it's the same river, but one area is more hot and dry, another area is more tropical, another area is more dense and thick with overgrowth. It's the same river. It's just running through different ecosystems. And I think that's how we need to think about the GI tract. It's the same GI tract, but correct. The oral microbiome is very different than the stomach microbiome. It's very different than the small intestinal microbiome, the large intestine. And for the most part, we are testing the large intestine. Stool samples and stool testing is really showing you the large intestine. It's not always giving you a clear picture of the small intestine.
But we do know they'll influence one another. For
Right.
example, strep throat. We think, oh, that's an oral microbiome isolated thing. Not necessarily true, because we do tend to see those who have had recurrent strep throat also test positive for strep, even in their colon microbiome. So they will communicate with one another. These microbes will what's called translocate, and they will kind of float down the river
Yeah.
and
They'll
float
get
to
on a
other
little raft
areas.
and like I'm migrating a little bit.
Yes. So, we do see, okay, that strep isn't just causing tonsillitis and, tonsil stones. It's also decreasing the pH in the small intestine and the colon and enabling yeast overgrowth. And, there's ripple effects there as well. So they absolutely can influence one another. And we tend to find if you are having dysbiosis that originated in one of the microbiomes, for example, maybe you picked up a really strong gastroenteritis, maybe you picked up norovirus. That can sometimes then offset the balance in the bladder microbiome, the vaginal microbiome, the skin microbiome. So they do all communicate with one another and really can impact one another. I think the gut more so than the others, but the others can still impact the gut.
And so I have to paint the picture again, just so it's great when people understand is like we put a dam in this river and people just start, we make a dam and then we come to find out, oh my gosh, the salmon aren't spawning. Oh, where we put the dam, there's more flooding. And now there's more, let's say, crocodiles and other things. And so that's very much like our internal microbiome is where once you change something, and this could be you had a surgery, you had a baby, you took antibiotics, right? You put something that really wasn't there originally, like a dam, and now you're seeing this change. It's not really the microbes' fault. It's just those crocodiles are going to take advantage of this new space. Those salmon who no longer can swim downstream like they were are not going to spawn downstream. And you're left then with those ripple effects of going, oh man, those other species that like to eat the salmon or intermingled with the salmon can no longer do that. Now there's gaps where other opportunists take over, right? Just like we see that in the larger macro ecosystem, we see that in the smaller micro ecosystem. And that's where we have patients who are like, I have fungal overgrowth, I have SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and it just kind of continues from there.
So what I'd like to do is take one step back, and why
Mhm.
don't you tell everybody exactly what is the microbiome?
Yeah.
That
Mm.
microbiome. What processes that we know currently that it takes out, and then how does it impact our overall health?
Yeah, so I would say the microbiota is the correct term when we're talking about all the little cool critters, right? We call them like whether we call them gut buggies or microbes, whatever you want to call them, but the microbiota will encompass all the bacteria, fungi, archaea, protozoa, even parasites and things like that. We do have a parasitome and a virome. Viruses aren't really included in that. They have like their own separate virome. But when we add the ome to the end of it, like the microbiome, virome, parasitome, that's not including the actual species, but also their byproducts and their genetics. So that ome is really signifying like the effects of this huge and very powerful population. So just to clarify kind of those definitions a little bit, and then the impact of that is quite significant. And that's what we're still continuing to find out more and more about, where I think even right now, like we're hearing a lot about parasites and parasite cleanses, and we're hearing still a lot about colonics and colon cleanses and all these things, but we have to understand the bacteria help to balance the parasites. The parasites also help to balance viruses, and viruses help to balance bacteria. And when we try to eradicate one, or we don't really know what we're doing, and we're constantly doing cleanse after cleanse after cleanse, we are disrupting the ecosystem. It's very much like, a lot of people, I would say, don't like rats, but that doesn't mean we should kill all the rats in the world, right? They serve a purpose and a function. It's only when we start to leave garbage cans out, or, we're leaving our big dumpsters open, yeah, you're going to get more rats, right? You're creating an environment for the rats, and they're going to thrive
And breed.
and breed. And then you have the byproducts of that. Very, very similar to what's happening in our gut microbiome. It is the actual species, and then the byproducts of that, what they're making, how they're contributing. And this can get pretty deep, where we're also sharing genetics with some of these microbes, right? So we're not just getting the benefit of these guys living inside of us, they're also eating our food, interacting with food DNA, and interacting with our own DNA via bacterial viruses, human viruses, food viruses. A lot of people don't even know those exist. Like, wait, you mean bacteria have their own viruses? Food has their own viruses, and human has their own have their own viruses that are intermingling, and that's pretty amazing and kind of crazy when you think about it.
And because we have such a wide variety of different types of bugs, some can be what's called commensal or helpful, and can do things like create byproducts that decrease inflammation, that repair the
Right.
lining of the gut, that decrease cholesterol, that can help with metabolism in the endocrine system, can help with kidney function. So there's well-documented data that these can have positive influences. When they are positive bugs, they can have positive influences. And of course, on the other side, these more opportunistic bugs can have more inflammatory effects, and they can then have deleterious effects in the cardiovascular system, the endocrine system, the metabolic system, and all of these other systems, throughout the entire body. So I always encourage people, if they can come to me and they say, I don't know why I have insulin resistance. I'm plant-based and I exercise and I'm managing my stress. What's happening with your gut? Is your gut offset? Because that can then communicate those inflammatory signals to your endocrine system that can block insulin receptors, that can increase internal stress, even if you're working on mental, emotional stress, and that can offset the hormones that will impact insulin levels. So I really do believe in it. I'm clearly have a bias because it's my favorite subject. But I truly believe that the microbiome is going to influence our entire body tip to toe.
Everything.
So you mentioned parasites, and there's a lot of fear online, like everybody has these parasites, and I was talking to Dr. Pam Popper, and she's like, what river are you alongside of that you're swimming, swimming in, and in the Amazon, that you're worried about all these crazy, exotic parasites? How, and what, based on what you were saying, it sounded like there are parasites in our body, but they're just sort of part of this microbiome, that they're part of the a diverse culture within our body. Are parasites, for the average person, something we should be concerned about?
I would say for the average person, no. It's an extreme rarity. There are cases, like I've had patients who've come to me and they're like, I'm a missionary by profession. So I've traveled to every single continent and, had dysentery and all these different conditions. Of course, that person's more likely to have a parasite than someone who's never traveled outside of the United States. So, I think it's trendy right now to sell parasite cleanses. You have lots of influencers who promote parasite cleanses. I will say I've had 10 times more people come to me being harmed by a parasite cleanse because they never confirmed that they in fact had a parasite, than people who actually have a confirmed parasite, who can either do traditional Western testing and test positive for stool, ova, and parasites, or even if they've done more of a functional test and do come back positive for some type of parasite. It's an extreme rarity. It's ordinarily, and I've only seen it really in a handful of my own patients, but it's either someone who does a lot of international travel, possible. Or I've had one patient who worked in a lab with parasites. This was part of what she did day to day for work, and she ended up testing positive for a parasite. So it is very rare. I think you see it online, and I think people are confused because you see, I just saw this the other day. An influencer was posting, she was doing a parasite cleanse and coffee enemas, and she was showing them. And she was saying, look at these ropeworms that I'm excreting from my body. And that's not a parasite. It's when you're, shooting coffee up your rectum, it's your mucus barrier that's getting sloughed off. So these are pieces of mucus that are normal parts of our gut. These are not worms that you're releasing. So in my experience, parasites are quite rare. And again, usually there is some type of contributing factor to it. You're not really going to just pick up a parasite by going out to eat somewhere here, because we have pretty strict regulations on our food system. Not that it's impossible, it's just unlikely.
And I will add, like, if you are concerned about parasites, because it can freak you out. Like, what do you mean? I have a parasitome in my body. Like, I have parasites in me right now, and like probably like we travel quite a bit. I probably do have parasites, but if I'm concerned, I would say then double down, because really the connection. This was in a recent study, and we also know a really cool gastro who's doing some great innovative research on this, but we are lacking lactobacillus in the US population to where, so I don't even, I mean, there's some preliminary research coming out, which is really measuring the lactobacillus in human stool, and it's not looking good for the study size and the sampling going. Like, there's been some samples where people have 0 lactobacillus in their stool. We're going like, whoa, this is alarming, because what lactobacillus does is it does create some lactic acid in certain environments. So in the right environment, lactobacillus is going to help. That lactic acid, guess who doesn't like lactic acid? Parasites, right? So the lactobacillus, one of its main functions is to create an environment that parasites do not like to be in. So if you're getting that lactobacillus, if you're creating that balanced ecosystem in that environment, the parasites, even if they come in, whether it's an egg or a full-blown parasite, and you have this healthy, robust gut microbiome full of lactobacillus, it's going to go, ugh, I'm out of here. And then you poo and you're done with it, right? For the most part. So it's important to kind of understand that context as well.
And whether it's at the entrance or the exit, because, say you do consume undercooked sushi or, undercooked meat. We've all seen those gross videos of people showing like salmon at Costco is,
Some
riddled with
questionable.
parasites.
Yeah.
Your stomach acid is really going to take care of them for the most part. You could have low stomach acid. But if your stomach acid doesn't kill it off, your next level is bile acids, which are very acidic. But again, you could have issues with your liver, your gallbladder.
But I think
So
that's
then the
really
lactobacillus is going
pause
to
on
be.
that though too, because that's what, so how many Americans are on PPIs?
Mhm.
How many Americans have their gallbladder removed? So when we are kind of, again, these are the dams we're putting up, right? Where we're kind of manipulating this ecosystem a little bit too much without realizing the downstream effects. And so you're on PPIs, you're not eating enough lactobacillus, you removed your gallbladder, and now you're like, man, I got parasites, and now you're stuck with parasites. So it's like you have to understand the
Yeah,
context.
definitely. But yeah, there are things you can do if you suspect you have a parasite. You can test for parasites. And usually, if you have a parasite, you have severe symptoms when the parasite enters your body. It's not like, oh, I have some rectal itching and there's a whole colony, a whole family living in there. It's usually you have abdominal cramps, nausea, bloody stool. Your body's going to try to let you know something's wrong. Please help me.
So, and all right, so moving on from parasites, because it's sound like it's a parasite question. No, no, not like not in a bad way. I wanted to kind of put a break in there because I wanted to talk about this, something that's been popular for many years now are colonics, where people wash out their colon essentially, either with I guess it's a coffee enema, but they there's all this idea that we need to wash out our colon, that there's all this patch stuff in there. We had Dr. Furman on early today, and he said, and he does all these sigmoidoscopies, I believe it's called. And, he's done like thousands of them, and he said there's nothing on the walls. Like that's not really how it works. What are your thoughts on colonics? Is that something where it's just a craze that takes off in it, and it logically makes sense, but it's not backed up by the science. What are your thoughts on colonics? Are there any benefits? Are there any harms?
I, just for general gut health purposes, am not a big proponent of colonics. I think for a few reasons. One, if you're regularly doing them, then your body is always looking to preserve energy somewhere. So it then will become reliant on you having something external evacuate your bowels. And I've seen this happen to patients where then they say, I couldn't poop anymore on my own. I had to do colonics in order to keep going. So if our body can preserve energy, it absolutely will preserve energy. And it can also confuse the nerves because, that river analogy that James was giving, a river is flowing in one direction, unidirectional. So we have nerves and muscles and tissue that helps that happen, that peristalsis and that movement. Now, if you're suddenly shooting something up the opposite way, that's going to confuse the nerve signals. And so that also can then long-term cause more damage. So you don't want to really be investing in these short-term gains for long-term damage. The other risk with it is if you are using coffee or other heated liquids, you can have an internal burn. So you can actually damage the tissue. And then if the pressure is too high, then that can actually sometimes push open what's called the ileocecal valve, the little door that separates your large intestine from your small intestine. You have 100 times more almost microbial diversity in the colon than you have in the small intestine. You really don't have a lot going on in the small intestine because you don't want them there. You want to digest and absorb there. So if now you have this liquid shooting up, shooting the door open, you're introducing all these bugs into the small intestine. So I've also had people come to me having caused SIBO because they're going to colon hydrotherapy or they're, self-doing coffee enemas. And again, in this colon hydrotherapy, it seems like it's working because you see this little glass box and you're like, wow, look at that worm that just left my body. Look at that, whatever it is, you're sloughing off your mucus barrier because again, you shouldn't have this liquid aggressively washing through that very delicate mucus. So yes, you might have a little bit of stool that washes out, but hopefully you're naturally having a daily detox. You're having a bowel movement at least once a day. And if that's the case, then you're not in need of these things. I usually tend to see it in very extreme cases. And my goal is always to say, how can we get you going on your own? Because we need to get you off of these colonics as soon as possible.
And if you're doing a colonic, just ask why. Why are you doing this colonic? And just continue to ask why. If the answer is, well, I don't poo, it takes me 2 days, 3 days. We have patients who go once a week. There's people who go even less than that. And the answer is why. And so it's like, why are you constipated, right? Why are you not having a bowel movement? And I think that's the important question to answer. It's not really because you need a colonic. I mean, it can help, right? You're going to feel better after the colonic, but again, you have to assess the yeah, return on investment, right? Like the ROI of that is not good long term, right? So it's asking why, I think is the better question for sure.
So in one of the books I had read, the doctor was talking about how most Americans are actually constipated and don't realize it, and that their movement and they think because they go every day that they don't have a problem, but it's actually taking them 3 days for food to go through their body. Can you talk about why that is and what the health ramifications are of that?
Yes. So it's so important not just to ask, am I going every day, but to also ask, do I feel complete when I get up? Am I straining when I am going? What are they looking like? Do I feel like there was more in there that didn't emerge? What is the texture of the stool? So there's so much to really ask yourself, not just, yep, checked it off the box, move on, because you could be retaining quite a bit of stool. The normal motility time and motility period is 14 to 32 hours. So that should be more or less the time that, from the time you ingest something to the time it comes out, You should see that. And you can even test this at home. You can take a handful of either corn or sesame seeds, roughly chew them, try not to chew them too well so they don't get broken down too much, and then time how long it takes for you to see them on the other end. This will tell you more or less your motility time. So absolutely, if it's 3 days later, if it's, 4 days later, you are not fully evacuating, you're not fully emptying, and that's probably why you feel bloated or you have reflux or you have these other symptoms. They're not unique and occurring on their own for the most part. They could be, but usually people are, for lack of fiber, for lack of hydration, lack of movement, stress, we tend to be a constipated society. If we know that less than 5% of Americans are consuming the low fiber recommendations, then a very small percent, less than 12% of Americans are metabolically healthy, it's unlikely, most Americans are getting in that movement, that nutrition, that hydration, that sleep that helps regulate our motility and all the other things that are needed to have that just really good, complete daily evacuation.
So if we had optimal health and we ate some corn, how long would be the ideal amount of time before we saw that corn again?